Hello, Year 12, and welcome to our next ethics lesson, which is on business ethics. Okay, so this is a part of what we know as applied ethics, which means we're looking at one ethical issue, and then you need to apply two ethical theories. So, business ethics, you need to apply utilitarianism and Kantian ethics. And then later on, we'll be looking at euthanasia, where you'll need to apply situation ethics and natural moral law. So we'll look at that later on in the course. So these are the sort of exam questions that you might expect to get. Do businesses have any responsibility other than making a profit? Should businesses base their decisions on ethics? Can businesses afford to be ethical in a globalized economy? And can human beings flourish in a capitalist system? Okay, so business is what we're looking at. And the first thing that we'll have to do is we'll need to get a definition of what business actually is. So this is very similar to maybe business or geography that you might have studied at GCSE. Actually, it doesn't really have that much to do with RS. So what I mean by that is this isn't really to do with religion. Okay, this is just to do with ethics, good and bad behavior in a business. So what does business actually mean? Okay, well, obviously it comes from the word busy, and business really just means an organization that's out to make money, So we live in a capitalist economy. Capitalism is the idea that individuals can set up practices or businesses or companies where they can make things and accrue or gain what's called capital, which is money. So this is the idea that people can become rich and that there's a free market where people are able to make or design unique products or services that they can then sell. And many people believe that capitalism is a good system because it creates a lot of wealth, but also it creates a lot of inequality. And to some extent, as we looked at with the issue of sweatshops, there is an issue of maybe using people, treating people unfairly. So the opposite of a capitalist system is a communist system. That comes from the word commune or community. And communist systems are the idea that everybody owns capital. So everybody owns the money, everybody owns the industry. It's not in private hands. Okay? So, why should there be such a thing as business ethics? So maybe you want to pause the video and think about that. Should there be good and bad, right and wrong behavior for businesses? Okay, well, some people would say no, and that's because any behavior should be acceptable because a business only has one responsibility, and that's making money. So as long as you're making money, that should be all that matters. And we have critics such as Friedman who believe this, that a business's only responsibility is towards its shareholders. And we're going to look at what shareholders are in a bit. Other people would disagree and say that, of course, businesses need to be ethical because businesses treat people. That means they deal with human beings. If you deal with human beings, then it's possible to deal with them in a bad way or in a good way. For example, if you exploit humans, if you underpay humans, if you lie to humans. Okay? So, study the way that businesses work, whether they're working in a good way. That's what we're looking at. So we have some examples here on the slide of bad business. So obviously, slavery was business. Slavery was stealing people largely from West Africa. We look at the slave trade in the 17 and 1800s. So stealing people and forcing them to do work. And obviously, this is bad ethics. It might be good business because it made a lot of money, but it's bad ethics because you're treating people in a bad way. We have other examples of modern day slavery. So we have sex trafficking. We have drug dealing. You could argue that drug dealing is bad ethics because you're making money out of people's suffering and their addictions. You could also argue that any business which leads to the pollution of the environment is bad ethics because it's affecting people and the planet. And we also have examples of cases where the powers or the business, for example, the British Empire, and in particular the East India Company in the 1800s, performed very, very bad ethics while being conducting its business. So a very famous case of the British Empire selling opium. Opium is a very addictive drug to the Chinese. The British Empire became very wealthy doing this, but obviously it was very bad business. Sorry, bad ethics because it was treating people badly. Okay, so there's a question here, which is it even possible for a business to be ethical? And that's an interesting question. Maybe all businesses only care about making money, so they'll do anything in order to make money. If we think about Kantian ethics, the only thing that's good in itself is the goodwill, which means acting because of reason. Businesses act because of greed, that's what you could argue. So many people might argue that it's impossible for a business to really be good. And if they are being good, that's only because they want to appear to be looking good. And if they appear to be looking good, that means they might get more customers. So this is what's known as hypocritical window dressing. I'm going to look at that later on. Okay, so one of the best ways of really refining the way we think about the issues that we're discussing is to just think about a business. Okay, let's think about a small business that you might make. Okay, so ethics involves people and businesses involve people. That's why it's business ethics. So we need to consider the people that are involved in a business. So let's imagine that you're going to start your own business selling cakes. Small business. Who would it involve? You might want to pause the video and list all of the people that are involved in any way possible, all the people who are involved in your business. Okay, and you might list many people. So obviously you're involved. Obviously the suppliers, the people who provide the ingredients, so that's going to be farmers, but also the people who provide the packaging. You could also say the investors, the people who give you money, and they expect a return on that money, so they're called shareholders. You could also say the employees, you could also say the customers, so there's many, many, many people, and they've all got to be treated fairly and correctly for it to be considered good business ethics. So, this is what's known as a stakeholder. This is not a shareholder, this is a stakeholder. So a stakeholder is someone who has a stake. That means someone who has an interest in the activities of the business, who benefits from it or is harmed by it. And really everyone is a stakeholder. It can be anybody from the customer, the supplier, the employee, the owner, the CEO. It can also be people who are just affected by it. So the stakeholder could just be somebody who is affected by the pollution, maybe, that the business is emitting. Okay, so our example last time when we looked at Kantian ethics and utilitarianism was Primark, and we saw that the stakeholders could be the customers, but they could also be the individuals who are working in unfair conditions, making the clothing. So because of this, we have an idea called corporate social responsibility. And this is the idea that businesses or corporations have a responsibility to treat everybody ethically. Okay, corporate, which means corporation, is the idea in business that big companies, big industries are big kind of entities, they're big organizations, and they involve lots and lots of people. So a corporation is a big business organization. And what is argued is that there is a responsibility of businesses to all members of society, all stakeholders. Now, a stakeholder could be a shareholder. I'll try and explain a shareholder now. Businesses need money. They need money to get started. And the only way that they get money in a capitalist system is if people give them money. Now, you're only going to give a big organization like Primark money if you get something back. So what a shareholder does in a big corporation is it can be anybody at all. You can be a shareholder. It's called playing the stock market. And all you do is you buy shares. So you buy a share of the business. So let's say you buy 1% of the business and your share costs £10. Well, let's imagine 100 people do that and you've got £1,000. So the business has £1,000 and that's how they can get started. They can buy things that they need to begin their business. Now, when the business starts making profits, the shares go up. So let's say the business doubles in its size. Suddenly your share that you paid £10 for is now worth £20. And so you've made money. And you can buy and you can sell shares. This is what's called the stock market. So shareholders put their money into a business, and in return, they expect the business to do well. So most CEOs, which stands for Chief Executive Officer, the people who are head of a corporation, they are mainly interested in increasing profits for their shareholders. That's their main incentive, because otherwise they're not going to get the money in if they don't please the shareholders. They're not going to get the investment that they need, because the better the business does, the higher the value of the shares, the more people want to invest. Okay? But we also have the environment as well. You might want to increase your business, and that actually increases profit for shareholders, but then you've got this other competing factor, which is polluting the environment. Maybe your business is mining for oil. How do you weigh and balance your obligations as a business? Because if you increase money for shareholders, that might be destroying the environment. But if you look after the environment, that might be decreasing money for your shareholders. So it becomes very complex. Is it possible to be ethical as a business when there are so many competing variables and factors and stakeholders? You also have the community as well. So this is a problem. The difference between a stakeholder and a shareholder, then, well, we should know this. A stakeholder is anybody at all who's affected positively or negatively by the business. That can be customers, that can also be employees, that can be anybody who's affected. A shareholder is somebody who technically owns a share of the business. And the reason they go into business, they give their money to the corporation or to the business, is so that they can get a return on their investment. They can get a return on their shares. So which group should a business please more? Stakeholders or the shareholders? Very tricky. Well, you've got to respect the stakeholders because they've given you money. Sorry, the shareholders, because they've given you money. But sometimes that can be in conflict. with the stakeholders. So I'll give you an example now. Primark, their shareholders, they want to make money. However, that might affect the workers, stakeholders, because the workers are paid less. The less you pay the workers, the more money you're going to get from the clothing you sell, which means the more profit the shareholders are going to get. So if you look after the shareholders, the workers are suffering. But if you look after the workers, the shareholders are suffering. So there's a big problem, and it's actually very difficult to weigh up the competing ethical concerns that are involved in any business. Okay, so it's possible to buy shares. So you can buy shares, for example, in L'Oreal. Anyone can buy a share. And what we can see on the right is taken from their website. If you buy a share, let's say it costs £184, that's for a share of the business. And shares can go up and they can go down depending on how well the business is doing. And you can also buy and sell shares. And companies want to keep the shareholders happy because the shareholders are the people who are bringing in the money and the investment into the business. Okay, so benefits that come from being a shareholder are that you make money and you also get a bit of a say in how the business is run. So money from profits, and you have some influence in the way the company works. You also have no liability, which means if the company goes into debt or if the company is accused of illegal practice, technically you don't share in that responsibility. Now, risks that come with being a shareholder, you could lose all your money. It's like gambling. You also can't technically control what your money is funding. So very big corporations might invest your money in different places. Okay, so corporate social responsibilities. Now, should a business have a philanthropic responsibility? That means a responsibility towards charities and looking after people. Philanthropy means looking after or charity. Now, you might say, yes, they should. All people have responsibility, but businesses don't make any money doing this. They might look good doing this, but they don't make any money. So should they have a responsibility to look after people? Or should they have responsibility towards their shareholders? And a lot of the time, these two are in conflict, which we've said already. Which one should a business care more about? That's the problem. So we've looked at this already. Martin Friedman. Martin Friedman believes that companies should just be focusing on making profit. They have a moral obligation towards their shareholders, and the more profit they make, the better. This means they shouldn't be focusing on ethics. Now, why does Martin Friedman say this? Is he a bad person? Well, no, he's not. Martin Friedman is a part of an economic movement called free market economics, which is the idea that if we let companies just focus on profit, this actually benefits everybody. Because the bigger a business gets, the more people it employs, the more money trickles down. This is called trickle-down economics. So maybe it's a good thing to just let businesses make as much money as possible and it benefits everybody. This is the idea that's taken from a very famous film of the 1980s called Wall Street. And in it, a fictional character called Gordon Gekko says, greed is good. Greed is good. And this is the idea that the more greedy a company is, the more money it will make, which means the more it benefits everybody. Now, does greed actually benefit everybody? There's a tricky question. Okay, so do you think companies actually care about people and the environment and the poor? Maybe they do. Maybe individuals in the companies do, but the company as a whole probably only cares about profit. Because if you're not maximizing profit, you'll probably get fired, or your shareholders will disappear. Why might some people say it's not even possible for companies to care about people? Well, you could argue it's because companies only care about profit, and that's the capitalist system that we live in. So let's look at an example now. Tom's. Tom's are a shoe company, and they made a big advertisement a few years ago saying this: for every pair of shoes you purchase, Tom's will give a free pair of shoes to a child in need, a child in a poor country. Now, this is obviously a business which is being very ethical. The question I want you to pause the video and think about is this: do you think Tom's, the company, actually cares about children who need shoes? Why else might they be doing it? Think about this to yourself. Okay, we might not like the answer to this, but it could be that Tom's are only doing this to look good. They're only doing this so that more people buy their shoes. In short, they're only doing it for profits. They're only doing it for money. So if we look at the goodwill with Kant, the only thing that's good is doing the right thing because you believe it's the right thing, because reason is telling you to. This isn't the goodwill, because the motive here could be to make money. How do we know that? Well, they've advertised it. They've spent millions and millions of pounds advertising how great they are. And this might be because they know that customers want to be ethical, and therefore they'll make more money if the company looks ethical. And you could disagree with this and say, well, actually, people who work for Tom's actually care about children, and that's why they're advertising it, and that's why they're doing this. But lots of people would disagree, and they'd say this is hypocritical window dressing. Hypocritical means that they're kind of two-faced. They're saying they care about something, but really they only care about making money. And window dressing means dressing up their business. So they're dressing up their business as ethical, but it's hypocritical. They're not really ethical. Okay? So you could argue the company wants to have an ethical impact, but you could also argue that it encourages customers to choose them. Therefore, it's only done to please the customers. It's only done for profit. And this then means they're only pleasing the shareholders, because the more profit the company makes, the happier the shareholders will be. Okay. Do you think they actually care about children? Well, we've asked this already. So this led, not this exact example, but these questions led to what's called the FTSE 4Good. FTSE is a list of businesses, and it's called the Ethical Index. So FTSE, which is an independent organization, rates companies based on how ethical they are. For example, reducing greenhouse gases, energy efficient, rejecting immoral behavior, and businesses want to get high up on this list. But the argument is that they only want to get high up on this list so that they get more money, because then they become attractive to consumers. So there is a question here about hypocritical window dressing. So here's a very sort of small case example. Let's imagine this coffee and cake store put in their window, we are 100% organic, fair trade, and 10% of our profits go to charity. Do you think they really care about these things, or do you think they're just saying, look how ethical we are, shop with us? So you can think that to yourself. Maybe companies do really care. Maybe they don't. That's something for you to consider. It's called hypocritical window dressing. And we do see some instances of it being hypocritical. So, for example, VW, Volkswagen, a car company, they lied about their emissions. So they said, oh, our cars don't actually release that many greenhouse gases. But they actually did, and they lied. And the reason they lied was to look good. So this does happen. Okay, so a case study. Primark manufactures clothes in Bangladesh. Why? Is it ethical? Well, they want to pay their workers fairly, according to the local income. So many people at Primark argue that they're actually paying the people in Bangladesh more money than they would ordinarily be getting. Brings money to the local community, products meet standards. They also have introduced paper bags to limit plastic waste. They have projects giving back to schools in India, free medical care for workers. However, they could just be doing this in order to look good. When we scratch beneath the surface, we see that actually many companies are not behaving ethically at all. So you can watch this in your own time if you just type in the link. This is a case of the Rana Plaza disaster. And this was a case where Primark and many other retailers of clothing, they outsource the manufacturing of the clothes to places like Bangladesh because it's cheaper. And the reason the wages are cheaper is because the places where the people make the clothes, they don't spend any money at all on the working environment, on the structure of the buildings, for example. And the Rana Plaza disaster was an incident where many people died in one of these sweatshops because companies weren't paying the workers enough money, and they weren't paying the companies that look after the workers enough money, and therefore the building wasn't structurally sound, and it killed many people. So what would happen if Primark paid its workers more? That's what would avoid this. Well, the answer is we wouldn't shop there anymore. In order to pay the workers more, Primark would need to charge more for their products. Well, what's the reason that we go to Primark? Because it's cheap. So maybe it is our fault. We choose to go to Primark, and that's what's led to these deaths. So maybe it's not even the company's fault. You could argue it's the consumer's fault for being greedy and wanting clothes at the cheapest possible prices. Another example of hypocritical window dressing, you could argue, a company called Karma Cola. Karma, we know from year 8, means good or bad energy. It's a Hindu idea. And this is a company which advertises itself as being really ethical, paying its workers loads of money, looking after its employees. But you could argue the only reason they do this is to make money. We want to shop in places where there is an ethical concern for all of these stakeholders. Another case study, and I strongly suggest you watch these links in your own time, is Iceland, and this happened around 2 years ago. So Iceland is a food company, and they made a massive advertising campaign saying that they have removed all palm oil from their products. Palm oil is really bad because it leads to the destruction of rainforest habitats for orangutans. And lots of people criticized them because they said the only reason they were doing this was to make money, to look attractive, and to attract more customers. And Iceland even began selling little cuddly toys of orangutans. And they gave some of the profits to the orangutan sanctuaries. Did they really care about the orangutans? It could just be hypocritical window dressing. Good publicity for them, attracting more customers. So Kant might disagree with this, saying that this is not the goodwill. They're doing this for profit. But a utilitarian might disagree and say, It doesn't matter why it's being done. It's good that it's being done because it's maximizing happiness for more people. So we have different ethical considerations. And we have another case study here, which is Kenco Coffee Company in Honduras. And feel free to watch this video in your own time. Okay, so you could argue it's bad for companies to take social responsibility seriously because if companies fail to do it, they could get fined. And someone like Martin Friedman might say companies shouldn't be concerned with ethical behavior. They should be concerned with making a profit. The tricky question comes with, well, actually, you could make more of a profit if you're ethical, because that attracts consumers, because consumers want to shop ethically. Okay, so we have problems where you can't actually be ethical sometimes in a business. So let's imagine a company wants to shut down steel makers in Liverpool because it's not affordable anymore. You could say the ethical thing to do would be to keep the factory open because all of these workers are going to lose their jobs. And if they lose their jobs, their families suffer, they suffer. But then if you keep the steel works open and it's not making any money, then the shareholders will lose out. So who should the company be more concerned with? The shareholders, the people who've invested, or the workers? And it's very tricky, and usually the shareholders win. Okay. So this is looking at globalization then. So globalization is the idea that companies move the factories to different countries because they can pay the workers less money. And this happened a lot in the 1980s in Britain. So a lot of industry in Britain, steel workers and other places, had to shut down because companies realized that it was cheaper to go to places like Bangladesh. They could pay the workers less money. So is globalization ethical? You just pause the video and think about that to yourself. Okay, so here we have some responses. No, you could argue the intention behind globalization is unethical because you're doing it to make profit. You could argue yes, just being focused on profit is ethical, according to Martin Friedman, trickle-down economics. Yes, the workers in globalized countries may be paid not very much. However, this is not very much to us. Relative to them, it's actually quite a good standard of living, so it's maybe doing them a favor. No, MEDC means more economically developed countries compared with LEDC, less economically developed countries. So like the steel workers in Liverpool, they suffer because they lose their jobs. You could argue just because someone is being laid off, does this mean that it's unethical? There is UK law which protects the rights of workers, so they do get ethical welfare, redundancy packages, etc. Okay, very nice. So, how would Kantian ethics respond to social responsibility? So you might want to pause this and think about this to yourself. Here's a quick summary of Kant. The only thing that is inherently good in itself is a good will, acting out of reason. The only thing that is an end in itself is human reason and freedom. We can use people, but cannot just use them. We have to respect them as an end. And we have to follow the categorical imperative, universalizability, only do what we can all do. And ends, not means, treat others with respect and dignity. So pause the video and think to yourself, what would Kant say about business practice and social responsibility? Okay, so I think Kant would say this: businesses should not exploit workers because it's treating them only as a means to an end. You could also argue with globalization, do LEDC workers have free rational choice? Maybe they're not economically free because they're forced into that situation. The Rana Plaza is a situation where the employees weren't treated as an end in themselves because conditions led them to die. You could argue that some businesses are always wrong for Kant, such as the sex trade, because it's not possible to universalize slavery. Drug dealing, polluting the environment, you could say is a contradiction in the will. We could universalize it, but we wouldn't want to, so maybe it's an imperfect duty. So these are all things you can consider when looking at Kant. So Kant may disagree of lots of business practices. Business is okay as long as the practices are universalizable and all stakeholders are treated as an end in themselves. I think this is what Kant would say. So let's look at the strengths and weaknesses of this view. Well, the strengths are that it's fair to all people and it respects individuals. These are like the general strengths of Kant's theory. Weaknesses, some actions can't be universalized. So the point here is it actually restricting business? And a good example of this is CEOs, for example, are paid millions of dollars or pounds, and you can't universalize this. If everyone was paid this, there'd be no money left to keep paying everyone this. So does that mean that Kant would be for some sort of communist system where everyone's paid the same amount? Maybe this is a strength, though, because Kant is saying that we should all be paid equally. Maybe Kant would disagree because he'd say being paid different amounts isn't an ethical issue. Okay. How would utilitarianism respond to social responsibility? Well, summary of Bentham, whatever produces the greatest amount of pleasure for the greatest number should be done. Think about this to yourself. Okay, so I think at least ACT utilitarianism seems to allow behavior that maybe Kantian ethics wouldn't, behavior that's a little less ethical. And that's because anything is acceptable, remember, as long as it leads to the greatest happiness. So, Friedman, Gordon Gekko, this idea that greed is good, the more money made, the more money that is raised for healthcare, for example, through taxes. So maybe it's okay for businesses to just make profit, even if it affects some. Utilitarianism is about the happiness of the majority. Businesses should act according to the hedonic calculus and work out who's going to receive the greatest amount of pleasure. And we looked at this a few weeks ago with sweatshops with the hedonic calculus. And you could have an AO2 point here and say, well, hedonic calculus is better than Kantian ethics when it comes to business ethics because it's more flexible and it works out the competing demands of different variables much better than Kantian ethics does. You could disagree and say that actually rule utilitarianism and Mill would promote rules that businesses should stick by that produce the overall happiness. So there could be rules like don't exploit people. So it's quite complex. Okay, so this is a typical question. Is corporate social responsibility nothing more than hypocritical window dressing, covering the greed of a business intent on making profit? So when businesses say that they're doing good things, is this just a way of them making money? They don't really care. And there are 4 or 3 positions here. I'd like you to pause the video and decide on which side of the argument these positions are. Are they on agree or disagree? Okay, and here are some points then. So corporate social responsibility is nothing more than hypocritical window dressing. Social responsibility primarily helps public image. Companies primarily value their shareholder. Disagree. Oh, sorry, also companies lie about their social responsibility, for example, Volkswagen. Disagree. Some companies do want to help communities, for example, Tom's. Kantian ethics would say that corporate social responsibility is good because it treats people as an end in themselves, so maybe they're doing something good. There is pressure on companies to engage with social responsibility. People who create businesses may have a genuine ethical responsibility. So, for example, Bill Gates is the richest man in the world, and he has used his money to help many, many, many people in the Bill and Melinda Gates charities, but he doesn't actually advertise that much the work that he does, which suggests that he's not doing it to sell more Microsoft computers. He's doing it because he cares. Okay, this is our next topic, whistleblowing. So whistleblowing is when an individual, maybe an employee, speaks out against unethical practice. So they blow the whistle and they say, what you're doing isn't right, and they report to the company. Now, is this a good thing? Well, some might argue it is, because it holds companies to account and keeps them ethical. Some might say it's a bad thing because you're kind of like being a snitch. You're sort of reporting against the people who are paying your salary. So why would someone want to whistleblow? So if the company is maybe treating the environment badly, if the pay gap between genders is bad, if there's unsafe working conditions, sexual harassment, it could also be for a bad reason. It could just be because there's no reason, you just hate the company. So whistleblowing might be a good thing because it ensures ethical standards. Company can improve, protects individuals, exposes unethical practices, ensures companies follow the rules, makes companies take social responsibility seriously. So Silkwood is a film based on a real story. You can watch the trailer here. And it's about a woman who was a whistleblower for a nuclear power station. And she raised concerns, but then she died. And lots of people say that she was killed because she was blowing the whistle. So it explores lots of issues. You can watch this film or this trailer in your own time, and it's something interesting to mention in your essays. So it tells us that there's a risk with whistleblowing. There could be a backlash from the company, professional problems, bad reputation, could be dangerous, relationships could be damaged. Edward Snowden is another good case study. It's always good to look at case studies with practical ethics like euthanasia and business ethics. He worked for Dell and the CIA and the National Security Agency, and he leaked or exposed government papers because he believed that the government was doing immoral things. Okay. Now, was this a good thing? You might say yes because it exposed the government, but you might say no because it led to loads and loads and loads of very sensitive information being made public. And you could argue that this led to a dangerous situation because enemies of America could use this information to plot terrorist attacks. So charges eventually were filed against him for stealing government property. He believed it was in the best interest of the public for each and every one of these documents to be published. Was he right to whistleblow? Well, again, that's something you can pause the video and think about in your own time. Now, when the New York Times published one of the documents, it wasn't properly censored and the information became available to Al Qaeda, which is a terrorist organization. So this is one of the arguments against whistleblowing. So some people might say whistleblowing is wrong because you are breaking a promise. Remember, Kant says you can't break a promise. And an individual should take all the steps available to him or her to sort the problem out within the business. This is what Norman E. Bowie states. He says, whistleblowing violates a prima facie duty of loyalty to one's employer. Prima facie just means an obvious duty. On the face of it, it's an obvious duty that you have. And you have loyalty to the people who are paying your salary. So how would a Kantian respond? Well, the categorical imperative is honesty and promise keeping, so maybe whistleblowing is bad. But you might argue it's good because you're protecting society, treating them as an end of themselves. You're also not lying because you could argue that if you weren't exposing the information, you were lying. Promise keeping, though, you made a promise to the company when you sign the contract. Okay, but then you are making the truth more obvious, so maybe it's defending people's freedom and their ability to use reason. So, like all of these things, it's complicated. How would utilitarianism respond? Well, anything is acceptable, remember, for an act utilitarian, so long as it produces happiness. So you'd work out through the hedonic calculus what leads to more happiness, and that would depend on each case. You could argue that if the information got into the hands of a terrorist organization, this wouldn't be a good thing. But if it led to the company reforming and becoming better, then you could argue that it would lead to more happiness. Mill might have a different approach because he might think about rules. Maybe there are some rules which shouldn't be broken, such as don't betray your employer. Okay, good ethics is good business. That's our next topic in this unit. This is the idea that if you behave ethically as a business, you're going to make more money. So it's a little bit like hypocritical window dressing. The better you behave, the more free shoes, for example, that Tom's gives away, the more money that they're going to get because they're going to attract customers. So this idea can be understood in three main ways. First one, there's nothing different between business decisions and any other kind of decision. Just like any other decision, a good business decision is likely to be a good ethical one. Business decisions are inherently unethical because they seek to only benefit the business. So this is the idea that good ethics can never be good business. And finally, most everyday business decisions do not involve ethical choices, but when they do face a choice between something right and something wrong, ethical guidance would be beneficial. So again, you might want to pause the video and think to yourself, which one do you think best represents businesses? My opinion is number two. I think that business decisions only seek to benefit the business. So I don't think good ethics is good business. Okay, so I'd like you to think about these to yourself. These are some individual scenarios that we've made up. Are they good ethics and good business, or good ethics and bad business? 1. Shops are no longer allowed to give out free plastic bags, but a local family-run shop is buying them for 5p to give to customers who've forgotten bags. 2. A beer company is marketing its new beer and asks people to send in photos of the most outrageous party to win 1 crate of beer every week for a term. A new cafe owner decides to increase their customer base with an online voucher promotion that offers half-price unlimited meals for a month. And a transnational food company sells surplus baby milk powder to developing countries at a heavy discount. Okay, so I would argue that A perhaps is good business maybe because they're attracting customers, but bad ethics because they are promoting the use of plastic bags. B is probably bad ethics because you're encouraging drinking, but maybe good business because it's a good marketing scheme. C, you could argue that this was good ethics and good business because you are encouraging people to come to your shop, but you're also encouraging people who maybe can't afford a meal to be able to eat there. And finally, this is probably both as well. Okay, so how will companies benefit from making a good ethical decision? Well, they'll become more attractive to other people, more attractive to people who want to work for them, for people who want to invest in them, and maybe for people who want to buy products from them. Is this always the case, though? Well, that's debatable. Okay. These examples demonstrate that companies often just go for what's in their best interest. So 0-hour contracts are a case where people are paid but they don't have a fixed contract. And what this means is workers are often exploited. And this happens in all of these businesses that you can see here. And that's not very good ethics, but it's very good business because it means that you can get rid of employees very quickly. So good ethics is good business. We could argue a company like Primark has to start putting more money into making clothes in the store in order to decrease their carbon footprint. But then what will happen is the customer will be charged more money. So what then ends up happening is it's not very good business, the more ethical you are. So it's very complicated. There's no straightforward, easy answer to any of these decisions. Okay, so what is a drawback of using utilitarianism with business ethics? Well, these are all going to be the drawbacks of using utilitarianism in general. Too complex because there's too many stakeholders. Focuses on profit because profit arguably leads to pleasure. Hedonic calculus takes too long. How would a utilitarian respond to good ethics, good business? Well, you can think about this in your own time. As long as you focus on the idea that utilitarianism is only concerned with pleasure or happiness. So whatever decision increases pleasure or happiness, it might be more profit and less ethics. It might be more ethics and less profit. It really depends. So Bentham would say any decision is good as long as it creates the most pleasure for the greatest number. Mill might say follow rules. So maybe the rule of treat people ethically would lead to more pleasure. Okay, so the third formulation of the categorical imperative is always act as though you were a legislating member in a universal kingdom of ends. This is very helpful because this means that any decision that you make in business will consider the best interests of everyone as an end in themselves. The second formulation is to treat others never solely as a means to an end, but also as an end in themselves. And this is good because it treats people rationally and treats people as an end in themselves. You could argue this is bad business, though, because it means you have to care too much about the workers. So Kantian ethics, arguably very helpful for business because decisions won't be detrimental to anyone. All stakeholders will be kept happy because no one will be used as a means to an end. Possible issue, though, is shareholders won't be happy because too much money is going into looking after the ethics of the business. And also, you could just argue Kantian ethics is unrealistic. It's not possible for everyone's interests to be looked after. Okay, so how would a Kantian respond? Well, you can look at this in your own time. Okay, so this is what we've looked at then. We've gone through it quite quickly. We've looked at corporate social responsibility, hypocritical window dressing, whistleblowing, good ethics is good business, globalization. The last thing to look at is human flourishing and capitalism. So globalization we sort of looked at already. So you can look at this more in your own time. This is a very interesting quote from Jeffrey Sachs saying about how important globalization is. We're going to go through this quickly because we kind of touched on it already. Okay. So here are some utilitarian and some Kantian responses to globalization. Okay, so what I want to look at is I want to look at consumerism. So consumerism is the idea that happiness comes from buying things, from consuming more and more profit, or more and more products, sorry. And consumerism goes hand in hand with capitalism. The idea that individuals should strive to make profit by selling things, and the more things you sell, the better. Positive impacts of consumerism means we get lots of choice, and there are lots of products out there, and lots of things that will better our lives. Some of the negative impacts, we've got the environmental impact. You've also got the social impacts, the fact that really you're living your life based around the idea that things, material products matter. And lots of people would say spiritually, this isn't a good way to live. Now, capitalism is the idea that money can be in the hands of individuals. And the best way of looking at it is capitalism is the idea that it's okay for there to be inequality. Some people can work and not get much money, and some people can own things and have loads of money. So it's an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. So this is a possible question. Can people flourish? Can people live a good life in a consumerist and capitalist system? So feel free to think about this to yourself. Here are some possible positions. You can pause the video and try and put these into either side of the argument, either into the yes column or the no column. And here are some answers that I've come up with. So agree. People flourish with consumerism because it allows for a good quality of life. We live a better, longer, healthier life now than we ever did. We live in a capitalist economy now. Yes, it incentivizes people's behavior. It means you work harder because people know that they can get more money the harder they work. Yes, consumerism enables us to develop a sense of identity. You can buy things that fit in with your lifestyle. The economy benefits. The more people spend, the more taxes are given to the government, which means the more money can get reinvested into things like healthcare. Disagree. Human experience becomes preoccupied with greed. We only care about more money, more money. It makes us selfish. Life is reduced to materialistic happiness, which is temporary. Materialism is never ending. No one's happy with just the stuff they have. They want more and more and more. It encourages waste. It's bad for the environment. Okay? So that concludes our lesson on business ethics. Now, please feel free to go through any of the slides because we did go through them fairly quickly because I wanted to get the video done in under an hour. I don't have an essay for us to go through this time, but I would suggest that you go back to last week's essay on Kantian ethics applied to business ethics and the issues surrounding business ethics in that essay are how you should write a business ethics essay. Okay, thank you very much, Year 12. Next week we will be looking at natural moral law.